The morning started quietly, with the soft light of dawn filtering through the tall windows. The streets were calm, almost empty, and there was a sense of promise in the air. He had been looking forward to this day for weeks, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was not just any place. It was a space he had long hoped to claim as his own. Years of hard work, careful planning, and small sacrifices had led to this moment. He walked steadily, his steps measured, his mind focused. But he did not expect what awaited him as he approached the property. The first thing that struck him was the meticulous care evident in every corner. The gardens were trimmed, the pathways neat, and the walls freshly painted. It was clear that someone took pride in this place, but he also knew that pride did not always come with truth. He had come to take ownership, not to challenge anyone's sense of control or entitlement. Yet life has a way of testing patience in the most unexpected ways. Before he could even set foot on the front steps, a voice cut through the quiet morning. It was sharp, demanding, and filled with an authority that felt misplaced. "You don't belong here," the woman said, stepping directly into his path. Her tone left no room for discussion, her words like a wall thrown up between him and the place he had every right to enter. She looked at him with an intensity that suggested she had been waiting for someone like him. His presence seemed to upset her equilibrium, as if the very fact of his arrival was a threat. He paused, taken slightly aback, but he did not respond immediately. There was no need to raise his voice, no need to match anger with anger. The air between them was thick with tension. Passers-by began to notice, some slowing their pace, curious about the confrontation. Her confidence was striking, the way she carried herself as if the entire property belonged to her. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a crack in her composure. Subtle but noticeable to someone who looked closely, he straightened his posture and met her gaze. Calmness was his ally. He had prepared for resistance, for disbelief, for confrontation. But he had not expected the intensity of her immediate dismissal. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began gently. His voice was steady, careful not to provoke, yet firm enough to show that he was not a man easily swayed. She did not move, did not blink, simply held her ground as if daring him to challenge her. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion written clearly across her face. "I said you don't belong here." "You need to leave," she repeated, louder this time. There was no questioning in her voice, no room for negotiation. To anyone watching, it seemed as though she held all the power, as though her word alone could shape reality. But he knew better. He had prepared for this moment, had anticipated the disbelief, the accusation, the challenge. All he needed was patience and presence of mind. People began to gather at a distance, cued by the drama unfolding before them. Some whispered to each other, forming opinions without knowing the facts, as humans often do. Assumptions were made, judgments passed silently in the minds of onlookers. It was a situation that could have easily become hostile, yet he chose to remain calm, aware that losing composure would only make things worse. There was a quiet strength in standing firm without aggression, and he understood that better than most. The woman took a step closer, as if proximity alone could enforce her claim. She gestured toward the door, demanding compliance without saying it directly. Her body language was precise, practiced, a demonstration of control she believed she wielded. He noticed the subtle signs of anxiety in her movements, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the tension in her jaw, small cracks in the armor she projected so confidently. They were almost imperceptible, but they revealed the human beneath the facade of authority. He spoke again, his tone even, inviting rather than confrontational. "I am here because this place belongs to me. I have every right to be here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. He did not shout, he did not argue. He merely stated a truth that would soon have to be acknowledged. She reacted instantly, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. She could not reconcile what she believed with what she was hearing. Her sense of certainty faltered for just a moment, enough for him to see that the battle was not with the world outside, but with her own assumptions. The crowd around them shifted. Sensing the tension, unsure of which way to lean, some faces showed sympathy for him, perhaps recognizing the unfairness of the confrontation. Others seemed ready to side with her, influenced by her confidence and the forcefulness of her claim. It was a small microcosm of society, quick to judge, slow to verify, swayed by appearances rather than truth. He knew this well. He had encountered it many times before, in smaller battles that tested patience and restraint. The woman's voice rose again, more insistent, tinged with frustration. "I don't know how you think you can just come here and claim this, but it's not yours. You have to leave." Her words hung in the air, echoing off the walls of the building. She was certain of her position, but certainty is not proof. He listened, patient, letting her speak, aware that the more she projected, the more evident her insecurity became. People who dominate with noise often do so to mask their own uncertainty. He took a calm breath and responded, careful to keep control of the moment. "I am not here to take anything from you. I am here to claim what is already mine. There is no need for conflict if we both remain honest." His words were met with silence, a momentary pause that seemed to stretch forever. She blinked, as if realizing for the first time that this was not a simple misunderstanding. There was depth behind his presence, a reality she had not considered. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the property. Birds chirped in the distance, oblivious to the human tension below. The contrast between the serene environment and the confrontation unfolding was striking. Life continued around them, indifferent to their struggle. It reminded him that while moments of conflict feel immense, they are part of a larger tapestry of life, fleeting yet significant. He kept this in mind, grounding himself in patience. Slowly, he took a step forward, carefully measured, signaling no aggression but readiness to assert his right. The woman did not retreat. Her stance remained rigid, though there was now a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had expected resistance, but perhaps not the quiet confidence with which he approached the situation. The presence of witnesses may have made her more assertive, but it also held her accountable in subtle ways. People notice composure, and it often shifts the perception of power, as he prepared to provide proof of his claim. He noticed the subtle shift in the crowd. Conversations hushed, whispers stopped, and all eyes turned toward the woman and him. The balance of perception began to tilt. People tend to gravitate toward clarity, toward truth, even when it is not immediately obvious. His calmness and readiness contrasted sharply with her agitation, creating a quiet but undeniable tension. The story of the day was beginning to unfold. It was clear that it would leave a mark on everyone present. She finally spoke again, a hint of desperation in her voice. "I have no idea who you think you are, but this is not your place." There was an edge to her tone, a mixture of fear and defiance. She was beginning to realize that control is fragile when faced with patience and preparation. It is easy to dominate when others are unsure, but far more difficult when the truth stands quietly beside you. He knew this, and he stood ready, knowing that soon the reality would have to be acknowledged. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached for a folder he had brought, containing documents, records, and legal proofs of ownership. This was not a moment for shouting or aggression. It was a moment for clarity. The evidence was undeniable, yet it had to be presented with care, with respect, and with patience. The weight of truth is not in the loudness of its delivery, but in the certainty it carries. The woman noticed the folder, and her confidence wavered slightly. For the first time, she hesitated, unsure of what he might reveal. Her previous certainty, built on assumptions and appearances, was now being challenged by facts she could not ignore. The crowd sensed the change, a subtle shift in energy that suggested the confrontation was far from over, but that the balance was tilting. Curiosity replaced judgment, and silence fell over the witnesses as they waited for what would come next. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately, as if unveiling a story that demanded respect. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension around him. There was no need for theatrics. The truth would speak for itself. Each document he produced, each record, each proof, added weight to his claim. The woman's composure faltered, small cracks appearing where there had once been a confident front. She could sense that her authority, assumed and unverified, was about to be undermined. At that moment he realized that this was more than a confrontation over property. It was a test of patience, a lesson in humility, and a demonstration of how quickly assumptions can fail. The woman, the witnesses, and even he himself were participants in a human drama that revealed much about belief, perception, and respect. The morning light continued to filter through the windows, casting clarity on the situation and making the tension even more visible. The first part of the confrontation was over, though the story was far from complete. He had arrived, faced hostility, remained calm, and begun to lay the groundwork for truth to emerge. The crowd had seen a quiet confidence challenge, loud authority, and even the woman, for all her bluster, could not ignore the evidence beginning to unfold. This was a moment that would linger, remembered not for anger or conflict, but for the quiet strength of someone who knew their rights and held them with dignity. He took a step back, allowing the woman a moment to process what had just been revealed. Patience, he knew, was as powerful as any argument. The morning had started with tension and accusation, but it was moving toward clarity. Every action, every word was measured, demonstrating a level of control and awareness that few could challenge. The world around them continued, unaware of the lesson unfolding in its midst. But those present were paying close attention, as the crowd watched, some nodding subtly, others exchanging whispers. The woman's stance began to shift. It was almost imperceptible at first, a loosened jaw, a quick blink, a subtle step back, but it marked a change in perception. The certainty she had wielded as a shield was cracking under the calm persistence of truth. He remained steady, ready to continue, knowing that the next step would bring further clarity and eventually resolution. The morning had set the stage for something larger than a simple confrontation. It was a story about assumptions, respect, patience, and dignity. It was about the quiet power of preparation and truth. And while the day was only beginning, the first part of this human drama had already revealed the essential truths, that appearances can deceive, that confidence without knowledge is fragile, and that patience is often the strongest weapon in any confrontation. He closed the folder carefully, still maintaining eye contact, signaling readiness, but not aggression. The woman, for all her initial authority, was forced to pause, reconsider, and confront the reality before her. The tension lingered in the air, but it was now tinged with anticipation rather than certainty. Those watching could sense that something significant was about to unfold, that the balance of power was shifting, and that the story would not end in a simple victory of words. The quiet strength he displayed was magnetic. People could see it, even if they did not fully understand it. It was a demonstration of human dignity, of the ability to stand firm without malice and to assert rights without aggression. The morning continued to unfold around them, birds still chirping, light still streaming in, the world moving forward, yet within this small space, a powerful human story was taking shape, one that would be remembered by those present for a long time. And so, the first part of the story ended with a moment of quiet tension, a pause filled with anticipation. The confrontation had begun, assumptions had been challenged, and the groundwork for truth had been laid. The woman could no longer simply assert authority. The crowd could no longer rely on appearances. And he stood ready to take the next steps, calm, patient, and unwavering in the knowledge that truth and dignity would prevail. The air remained thick with tension, but it had shifted slightly from confrontation to curiosity. The crowd that had gathered watched silently, sensing that the story unfolding before them was far from ordinary. The woman who had first accused him of trespassing now stood frozen, her confidence wavering, though she tried not to show it. She had expected an argument, a frantic attempt to prove himself, perhaps even retreat. Instead, she found a calm, measured presence that made her own certainty appear fragile. He could feel the weight of the eyes on him, not with hostility but with anticipation. Some were curious, some skeptical, but all were paying attention. He understood that public scrutiny could amplify tension, but he had learned long ago that composure was more persuasive than volume. People rarely questioned calm certainty. It was a lesson he had learned through years of navigating challenges and facing judgments based on assumptions. The woman finally broke the silence, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to make it sound firm. "I've never seen you before." How can you claim this place? It's mine. I've been here for years. You don't belong here. Each word was sharp, carrying the weight of belief in her own authority. Yet underneath the sharpness there was uncertainty. She tried to mask it, but subtle signs gave her away, the slight tightening of her grip on her purse, the barely perceptible step backward. He remained silent for a moment, letting her speak fully. He had learned that sometimes the best way to handle confrontation is to listen, to allow the other person to reveal their own assumptions. Arguments built on aggression often fail, but clarity built on calm truth is hard to resist. He took a slow, deliberate breath and spoke, his voice calm but confident. I understand why you might think that, but I have all the proper documents, and everything here legally belongs to me. I am not here to fight, but to clarify the truth. Her eyes widened slightly, the edge of authority faltering. She had not expected such calm, such controlled confidence. Most people, when challenged, react with anger or fear, but he responded with clarity and composure. The crowd around them shifted again, sensing the subtle change. Some exchanged quiet whispers, speculating about what might come next. Human nature often gravitates toward drama, but when calm confidence stands in its place, the effect is striking. He took a step closer, though not in a threatening way, but in a way that suggested readiness and certainty. The folder he had held earlier was now in his hand, and he opened it carefully. The documents inside were orderly, clear, and undeniable. The legal proof of ownership, the records, the official stamps, all of it, spoke a language that could not be ignored. Look at this, he said gently, handing over the first set of papers. These documents prove ownership. I have every right to be here. The woman's voice faltered as she glanced at the papers. I don't understand. How is this possible? Her tone was a mix of disbelief and fear. She had built her authority on assumptions, on the confidence of claiming space without question. But assumptions crumble when faced with undeniable evidence. The more she tried to maintain control, the more fragile her position became. The crowd leaned in subtly, though no one spoke. Silence had replaced whispers, replaced judgment. They could feel the shift, the balance moving from presumed authority to undeniable truth. Some had already begun to recognize the injustice of the initial accusation. Seeing clearly that the calm man before them held the legitimate claim, human nature is quick to judge, but even quicker to adjust when faced with clarity. She stepped back slightly, a gesture that betrayed her discomfort. She tried to speak, to regain control, but her words were weaker than before. But I've been here so long. You can't just... Her argument faltered mid-sentence. She realized, somewhere deep inside, that the confidence she relied on was no longer sufficient. Facts had arrived, and facts were stronger than words or assumptions. He didn't push. He didn't need to. Patience was his ally. I am not here to take what belongs to you personally. This is about the truth. We don't need anger or conflict. We just need clarity. His words were steady, measured, and human. There was no arrogance, no attempt to humiliate. He spoke with dignity, with calm authority, and the difference was noticeable. People respond not to aggression, but to confidence coupled with respect. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her stance. The public confrontation she had imagined in her mind had not gone according to plan. She had assumed compliance, assumed submission, assumed a simple denial would be enough. But life has a way of teaching humility, often in front of witnesses, in moments that seem larger than they really are, he continued, explaining each document, each piece of proof, slowly, clearly. These papers show ownership, taxes paid, legal approvals. Every step has been followed correctly. This is not a claim. It is a fact. His words were deliberate, giving her time to process, giving the crowd time to understand. Knowledge is more powerful than anger, and clarity more effective than shouting. Some onlookers began to murmur quietly among themselves. The whispers were no longer about curiosity. They were about justice and fairness. People instinctively sense when someone is wronged, even in small, subtle ways. The tension in the air now had a different quality, less conflict, more anticipation. The audience was witnessing a rare kind of confrontation, one not defined by shouting or violence, but by truth and patience. The woman looked at him, then at the papers, then back at him again. Her face showed a mixture of fear, disbelief, and realization. The authority she had wielded so confidently was dissolving before her eyes. The truth is relentless. It does not apologize, it does not plead, and it does not bend. It simply is. And now the truth stood quietly in front of her, undeniable, patient, and unshakable. She tried to compose herself, brushing an invisible speck from her jacket, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "I just don't understand how this happened," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The words were softer now, lacking the previous sharpness, lacking the authority she had projected. Her body language betrayed her, her stance slightly lowered, her shoulders tense, but uncertain. She was no longer in control. Reality was? He took another step forward, carefully maintaining calm and respect. "You are not at fault for not knowing," he said softly. "These things can be confusing, and assumptions are easy to make. But now we have clarity, and we can move forward with understanding." The humanity in his voice softened the confrontation, transforming it from a battle into a conversation. There was no triumph in his words, no intent to humiliate. Only the quiet assertion of truth. The woman's gaze dropped to the ground. Her embarrassment was visible, though she tried to hide it. Moments of realization like this are uncomfortable, especially when witnessed by others. Yet, it was also a moment of learning, a chance to confront assumptions, to adjust behavior, and to see the fragility of confidence not backed by truth. She had acted on belief, but belief without evidence is easily shattered. The crowd had shifted again. The initial curiosity replaced with admiration for the calm man who had handled confrontation with dignity. Some nodded subtly, recognizing the strength and patience, the power and clarity, and the lesson in humility. They had come to witness drama, but they were witnessing something deeper, an example of how human interactions can be resolved with respect, patience, and truth. He sensed that the immediate tension was beginning to ease. The woman no longer spoke with authority. She no longer demanded. Her posture had changed from aggressive to hesitant, from confident to uncertain. The shift was subtle, but it was unmistakable. The confrontation was moving toward resolution, not through force, but through truth. "Let's take a moment," he suggested gently. "We can go over everything calmly without pressure or judgment." His approach invited cooperation rather than confrontation. Human nature often responds better to an invitation than to a demand. By allowing her space to process, he maintained control without force, showing that real strength lies in patience, not aggression. She nodded slowly, still silent, still processing. There was no outward acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but the change in demeanor was undeniable. She was no longer asserting authority. She was listening. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, quietly, but irrevocably. Witnesses could see it, feel it, and understand that this was not about victory or humiliation, but about truth prevailing in a human-centered way. He carefully laid out all the documents on a nearby table, each one clear, orderly, and undeniable. He explained each step, each record, each piece of proof, patiently and without rush. The woman's eyes followed, no longer challenging, but trying to comprehend. There was a softness in her demeanor, a shift from confrontation to reflection. The lesson was clear. Assumptions can only hold power until truth steps forward. Minutes passed in quiet examination. The tension gradually transformed into understanding, subtle but powerful. Witnesses remained silent, observing the unfolding human drama with respect. There was no shouting, no anger, no humiliation. Unleashing lead the unfolding of facts and the quiet assertion of truth. The difference was profound. Calm dignity had replaced aggression, patience had replaced defiance, and humanity had prevailed over assumption by the end of the morning. The first confrontation had fully transitioned into a moment of clarity. The woman, once confident and demanding, now understood that she had been mistaken. The crowd had seen a powerful lesson in patience, composure, and respect. And he stood quietly, not gloating, not aggressive, simply present, demonstrating that true ownership is not only legal, but human-rooted in respect, patience, and truth. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the property, casting light on a moment that would be remembered by those present. It was a lesson in humility, a story of patience, and a demonstration that truth, when presented calmly and clearly, carries a weight that authority without knowledge cannot match. The story of that morning would stay with everyone who had witnessed it, not as a tale of confrontation, but as an example of how human dignity, patience, and clarity can transform even the tensest of moments into something meaningful and instructive. The quiet that had settled over the property was different now. It was no longer tense or confrontational, but filled with anticipation. People had witnessed the first exchange, the documents being revealed, and the calm confidence of the man who had asserted his rightful claim. The woman, who had started the morning with authority and certainty, now moved slowly, uncertainly, as if trying to piece together the reality she had been forced to face. The weight of her assumptions and her previous confidence hung heavily on her, and the shift in energy around them was palpable. He noticed the subtle changes in her behavior, the small signs that spoke louder than words ever could. Her hands fidgeted slightly, her shoulders had lost their rigidity, and her eyes darted nervously from the papers to the crowd. She had built a narrative in her mind, one where her control was unquestioned and her assumptions unquestioned. But reality had a way of unraveling such narratives, and she was beginning to realize that. He did not speak aggressively. He did not press. He allowed her to process, to see the truth in her own time, showing patience that many found remarkable. The documents on the table were clear, neatly organized, and undeniable. He explained them one by one, slowly, deliberately, ensuring that the evidence was understood. This was not about gloating or winning. It was about truth. Each explanation he gave highlighted the meticulous work he had done to secure his rights. Taxes paid, legal approvals obtained, ownership confirmed, every step was documented. It was proof not only of legal right, but of human effort, patience, and careful planning. The woman could no longer simply assert authority. The evidence left her no room for that. Around them, the crowd remained silent, watching closely. Humans are naturally drawn to stories of conflict and resolution, especially when they are played out in real life. They had come expecting drama, perhaps shouting or arguments, but what unfolded was different. What they were witnessing was a confrontation transformed into clarity, a moment where patience and truth overshadowed aggression. It was a subtle but powerful lesson, and those who observed could feel the shift in energy, the change in the atmosphere around them. The woman finally spoke, her voice softer than before, tinged with confusion and uncertainty. I didn't know. I thought I was in the right. I didn't realize." Her words trailed off, unfinished, because she could feel that she had been wrong. The authority she had projected earlier had vanished under the weight of reality, placed with a vulnerability she had not expected to experience in public. There was no anger now, only hesitation. A human moment of realization that would remain with her. He listened carefully, nodding slightly, acknowledging her words without interrupting. Patience had always been his approach. Confrontation is often ineffective when it seeks to overpower, but when it guides understanding, it can transform minds. "It's okay," he said softly. "Mistakes happen. What matters is understanding and clarity. Now we can move forward knowing the truth." His words carried compassion, a human touch that softened the tension while reinforcing the reality of the situation. The woman looked down, processing everything. She had been so confident, so sure that she was defending what she believed to be hers. But assumptions are fragile when they meet facts. Her body language had shifted completely. She no longer stood with rigidity, but with a slight slump, an unspoken acknowledgement of her mistake. Humans often respond to truth with resistance, but when the evidence is undeniable and presented calmly, resistance fades. That is exactly what was happening now. He carefully walked her through each set of documents again, ensuring she understood the legitimacy of his claim. Every page, every signature, every official stamp mattered. "Look at this," he said, pointing gently. "Every step has been followed correctly. This is not just about the lit, it's about responsibility, about the effort and care that goes into ownership. This place has been managed properly, and all requirements have been met." His explanation was clear, concise, and grounded in reality. Leaving little room for doubt, the woman's eyes shifted from the papers to him. Her expression was a mix of disbelief, realization, and a hint of shame. She had acted based on assumptions and had tried to assert authority without verifying the facts. Now, faced with undeniable evidence and calm explanation, she had no choice but to reconsider her stance. The crowd could see it, even if only subtly, the slow change in posture, the hesitant glances, the unsteady voice. She was beginning to learn a lesson in humility, a lesson that would stay with her far longer than the embarrassment of being wrong. He did not push for an apology or acknowledgement. That was not the point. He had come not to humiliate, but to clarify, to assert truth without aggression. There is a quiet power in such an approach, one that resonates with people more than shouting ever could. The onlookers were witnessing something profound, a real-life example of patience, dignity, and human-centered confrontation. They could feel the shift in energy and understand that control comes not from force, but from clarity and calmness. The woman finally spoke again, her voice steadier, but still uncertain. I didn't mean to accuse you wrongly. I just assumed. I thought." Her hesitation spoke volumes. She had been forced to confront her own assumptions and realize how quickly confidence without verification can fail. It was a human moment, raw and honest, and it added a layer of depth to the unfolding story. The crowd watched, silently absorbing the lesson as it played out before them. He responded gently, without judgment. "It's natural to make assumptions. We all do it at times. What matters is how we respond when we realize the truth. Understanding and clarity are always better than maintaining a false sense of authority." His words were human, empathetic, and instructive, reinforcing the idea that mistakes are part of life but can be corrected through patience and respect. The woman took a deep breath, slowly, as if trying to steady herself. She looked around at the crowd, then back at the documents, then at him. The realization was settling, and she had been wrong, and there was no room left to argue. Her confidence, once a shield, had been dismantled by patience, calm, and undeniable truth. She was learning that authority without knowledge is fragile, and that human dignity is found not in asserting dominance, but in understanding and humility. He continued explaining the documents, walking her through each step of the process. Taxes, approvals, and legal records, all were accounted for. Each piece of evidence reinforced the truth, and with each explanation, her resistance waned. Humans are naturally inclined to trust facts when they are presented clearly, especially when done without aggression. She had begun with authority, but she was now guided by understanding. Her assumptions replaced by knowledge, the crowd around them remained quiet, observing the slow unfolding of clarity. There was no shouting, no spectacle, only a calm and methodical revelation of truth. It was a rare moment, human and relatable, showing the power of patience, preparation, and clarity. Many in the crowd nodded subtly, recognizing the lesson being taught not just to the woman but to everyone present. That calm, reasoned explanation can transform even the tensest moments. The woman finally raised her eyes to him, her expression a mix of embarrassment and respect. I see now. I didn't realize. I was so sure." Her words trailed off, but they carried sincerity. She had been confident, assertive, and loud, but she was learning that such traits are meaningless without knowledge. The real power lies in truth, patience, and clarity. He listened, acknowledging her words with a small nod, signaling understanding and closure without judgment. He then spoke to the crowd, softly but clearly addressing not just the woman, but all who were present. We all make mistakes. We all assume things without knowing the full story. The important part is recognizing the truth, learning from it, and moving forward with respect. Conflict does not need to dominate. Understanding can guide us. His words resonated, human and insightful, reinforcing the lesson that had been unfolding for everyone to see. The woman remained silent for a moment, digesting everything. Her previous confidence had been replaced with humility, and though it was uncomfortable, it was genuine. She had learned a lesson that could not be taken lightly. Assumptions are easy. Understanding takes effort. Authority is nothing without verification. Human dignity is found in honesty, not in defending false claims. He allowed her the space to reflect, standing calmly nearby. The crowd could feel the tension dissolving, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of truth. The confrontation that had begun with hostility had shifted entirely. What was left was clarity, understanding, and a subtle, profound sense of respect. Humans often respond more to patience than to force, and the example before them was a living demonstration of that principle. Minutes passed in quiet observation. The woman, once aggressive, now moved carefully, her demeanor thoughtful and reflective. She had seen firsthand how assumptions and misplaced confidence can unravel when faced with clarity and patience. The crowd had observed a human drama, not in anger or spectacle, but in the unfolding of truth and understanding. It was a powerful, relatable lesson, one that would remain with all who had been present. He finally spoke to her directly, softly, but with certainty. It is never easy to realize when we are wrong, especially in public, but acknowledging it is a sign of strength, not weakness. Now that we have clarity, we can move forward with respect and understanding. His words were human, compassionate, and instructive. They did not humiliate. They guided. And guidance is often more memorable than conflict. The woman nodded slowly, her posture still tentative, but less defensive. She had been humbled, yes, but she had also gained insight. The confrontation had evolved into a moment of learning, a shift from accusation to comprehension. The crowd had witnessed patience, dignity, and human-centered resolution. They had seen assumptions challenged, authority reconsidered, and truth asserted without malice. It was a moment of clarity that would linger. As the morning continued, the atmosphere became less tense, more reflective. Birds chirped in the distance, sunlight streamed over the property, and the small crowd watched quietly. The story of that confrontation had moved beyond hostility. It was now a lesson, a moment of human insight, a demonstration that calm, preparation, and clarity can resolve even the most challenging situations. By the end of that part of the morning, the woman had softened entirely. She no longer argued. She no longer asserted authority. She had been guided through a process of understanding, one that required patience, explanation, and undeniable evidence. The crowd had absorbed the lesson as well, that calm dignity, human respect, and clarity often triumph where aggression and assumption fail. The stage was set for the next steps. The final moments of resolution and the reinforcement of truth. The confrontation had moved far beyond initial accusations. It had become a story of human growth, patience, and understanding, a story that all who had witnessed it would remember. The man remained calm, composed, and patient. He had faced hostility without aggression, corrected assumptions without anger, and presented truth without malice. The morning had shown that even in tense moments, humans can rise above confrontation, embracing patience, clarity, and dignity. The morning had shifted from confrontation to a strange quietness, the kind that precedes a revelation. The crowd remained around them, quietly observing, sensing that something important was unfolding. The woman who had started the day with authority now moved slowly, her eyes scanning the documents and glancing at him, a flicker of disbelief in her expression. She had begun to understand that the situation was far more serious than she had initially believed. The confidence she had relied upon was gone, replaced by hesitation, uncertainty, and a dawning realization of her mistake. He stood calmly, patient, observing her reactions, He did not push her, did not speak harshly, or argue aggressively. There was no need for that. He had come prepared with truth, with evidence, and with patience, the most powerful tools in a confrontation. The crowd could feel it. There was a subtle energy in the air, a shift from tension to expectation. Everyone present understood that something decisive was about to happen. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the neatly organized stack of papers on the table. Each one was a piece of proof, a testament to preparation, diligence, and honesty. She had assumed that her familiarity with the place was enough to assert authority, but she now realized that appearances and assumptions carry no weight against clear evidence. She took a hesitant step closer, though not with confidence, more with a need to understand. He spoke gently, in a tone that was calm but firm, carrying both clarity and patience. Look carefully. These are the legal documents, the approvals, the records of ownership. Every step has been properly taken. This is not about assumptions or opinions. It is about fact. His voice was steady, conveying authority not through aggression, but through truth. The crowd listened intently, some leaning slightly forward, absorbing the quiet but powerful demonstration of reality. The woman picked up one of the documents, her eyes scanning the words, signatures, and stamps. She read, reread, and then looked up at him with wide eyes. The disbelief in her expression was clear. She had thought she knew the situation, that her authority and familiarity with the place gave her the right to challenge him. But reality was undeniable. The papers, the records, the careful preparation, everything confirmed that the property, the space she had claimed as hers, was legally his. She took a deep breath, her voice wavering. I don't understand. How is this possible? I've been here for so long. I thought I was protecting it, but her words faltered. She could feel the weight of her assumptions collapsing around her. She had acted on confidence, on belief, on appearances, but she had not verified. The realization was painful, yet undeniable. He responded calmly, without accusation, without judgment. It's understandable that mistakes happen. Most people act on what they see or assume, and it is easy to be convinced by appearances. What matters now is understanding the truth and moving forward with clarity. His words were human, empathetic, and steady, guiding her rather than shaming. It was a lesson not just for her, but for everyone observing. It's about patience, understanding, and the quiet power of truth. The woman's gaze fell to the floor, and she remained silent for a moment. The embarrassment, the realization, the dawning comprehension, it all played across her face. She had acted boldly, asserted authority, and challenged someone she assumed was an intruder. Now, faced with undeniable evidence and calm explanation, she had no defense. The authority she had relied upon had crumbled, replaced by humility, doubt, and an understanding of her own assumptions. He continued to explain the documents carefully, pointing out details, showing signatures, and walking her through each step of the process. Taxes had been paid, approvals obtained, ownership verified, every detail had been accounted for. The woman listened, slowly absorbing each fact. Her body language changed again, slightly more relaxed, but still tentative. The initial confrontation had dissolved into a lesson in humility, patience, and truth. The crowd, who had initially come expecting a dramatic conflict, now witnessed something far more powerful. They watched a confrontation transformed into understanding. Arrogance replaced by humility, assumptions confronted with truth. There was no shouting, no spectacle, only the quiet authority of facts and the human presence of calm patience. Many in the crowd exchanged subtle nods, realizing that they were witnessing a rare moment of clarity and learning.